many of the names are known, but so many more are not. Don't you think that's a fair statement? So many more our names are not known. And this is a wonderful introduction to our month of Black History. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Scott, and then we'll get started. Excuse me. Scott Ellsworth is an award-winning writer and historian, the author of 5 books, the last of which, The Groundbreaking, was long-listed for both the National Book Award and the Carnegie Medal. Scott has written about American life and history for the New York Times, Washington Post, and Los Angeles Times. Formerly a historian at the Smithsonian Institution, he's taught at the University of Michigan since 2007. Described by Booklist as an historian with the soul of a poet, he's appeared on The Today Show, PBS's The American Experience, National Public Radio, Fox, CNN, and the BBC. His newest book is Midnight on the Potomac, The Last Year of the Civil War, the Lincoln Assassination, and the Rebirth of America. So Scott, welcome. Thanks for coming.
Hi, you all. Scott is also forgetful enough that he thought this talk was in 2 weeks from now. So, any rate, so we're going to just kind of wing it here a little bit and go from there. But it's a delight to be with you all here today. You know, we're all familiar with the Rosa Parks story. And the version that we're taught is that Rosa Parks, like so many other millions of African Americans, had just grown tired of segregation, tired of being second class and all of that. And one day on a city bus in December 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama, when she was told by the white bus driver that she had to move to the back of the bus. Of course, in those days, buses in the South were segregated by race. Blacks sat in the back, whites in the front, although there were at times sort of a moving line, and until when there were just blacks on the bus, there was a little bit of relative freedom as to where you can sit. He tells her to do it, and she just decided, I was just too tired. I was tired of it all. She refused to do so, and police are called. She's hauled off and arrested, and the next thing we know, we have this dynamic young 26-year-old preacher by the name of Martin Luther King Jr. with his first pastorship at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, and the movement begins right there and there like magic, and we're off to the races. All right. Well, I'm here to tell you it didn't happen that way at all. Some of that is true, but much of it is, it misses a lot. So I think one thing important to remember is that African Americans throughout our history have always fought against their oppression. In slavery times, they ran away, they taught themselves how to read, they turned the religion of the white man into a religion of their own, a religion of freedom and of liberation. They broke tools, they malingered, they did whatever they could to live free lives and to have lives with some fullness to them. After the Civil War, with the death of slavery, of course, we have this new system of segregation known as Jim Crow that's enshrined in law and also becomes a way of social behavior. And everyone in the South knew what that meant. It meant by the middle of the 20th century that African Americans, by and large, could not vote in any Southern states. They were not allowed to serve on juries. They couldn't be police officers. You couldn't even testify against white people in a court of law. There were certain places that you could live and you couldn't live. There are places where you could be born and you couldn't be born. Hospitals you could go to, others that you can't. Segregation is a cradle to the grave thing. And if you stepped out of line, you could take your life into your hands. In Mississippi, in 3 counties in 1945 and 1946, after World War II, black World War II veterans in uniform went to their local courthouses and attempted to register to vote, and they were murdered on the courthouse steps. All right. And no one was ever arrested, anything like that. All right. So black people have this problem, and the problem is, how can I do something? How can we organize something to try to make changes in our oppression without everyone getting either killed or arrested from the beginning? All right. So in Montgomery, Montgomery is the state capital of Alabama. It was, a city that was, had a decent sized middle class as well. Certainly black and white neighborhoods completely segregated. But there was a sense in Montgomery that maybe we can do something. Let's see what we can figure out to make things better. And there are two key people in that. One is a guy by the name of E.D. Nixon, who was the chair of the local NAACP chapter in Montgomery. And even being in the NAACP in the South in the 1950s, postmasters, the national magazine of the organization, The Crisis, had to be sent in plain brown wrappers. In small towns, white postmasters would just throw the magazines away, then have them delivered to black families, things like that. But Montgomery was a state capital. There was an Air Force base in Montgomery, stuff like that, a little bit more progressive than some other southern cities at the time. And there was an NAACP chapter, E.D. Nixon, and Nixon had been he had also been an organizer for the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. What's a sleeping car porter? Anybody know?
A sleeping car is part of the railroad, right? Part of a train car?
Right. So, prior to, by the mid-1950s, to fly from New York to Los Angeles took 2 days. You could make it the first day to get to Kansas City, then you slept overnight, and flying was expensive. And so what a lot of people did is you took the train, and oftentimes you'd have to sleep on the train overnight. And the railroads had been organized, workers on the railroad, since the 1880s, but the workers that would make up the beds were the sleeping car porters. They were also the cooks and the dishwashers and whatnot. They were organized as well too. So he's a union man. He knows how to organize things, and he also has a fellow organizer as well too, a woman by the name of Joanne Robinson. Joanne Robinson taught at a HBCU, Historic Black College and University in Montgomery. And she was part of something called the Women's Political Council, which was a group of black women hoping to have some influence on politics. They're looking for ways that we can do something to attack Jim Crow and segregation. And they had thought about it for some time. They thought, well, maybe we can do something with the bus system, all right? Because there were lots and lots of African American women in Montgomery who rode the bus to well-to-do white neighborhoods in Montgomery, where they worked as cooks and maids and child care workers and others. And there weren't a lot of cars in black Montgomery at this point. And so there was a sense, maybe we can put some pressure on the bus system. And there had been problems too, because there were a number of incidents where white bus drivers would make sexual comments about young black women getting on the buses. They would also, as they pulled up to a stop, a black person tried to get on the front of the bus driver would say, hell no, you go around the back. And as they're going away from the back, the bus driver would take off. So there was a lot of anger in the community about the way they're being treated. And they thought maybe we could do something around one of these incidents. And then one day they thought they had it. There was a young woman by the name of Claudette Colvin, who I think is 19 years old, African-American woman. She was being mistreated on the bus. She refused to move back to the black part of the bus. Police are called, she's arrested, she's hauled off to jail, all right? So they go and visit Claudette Colvin, thinking maybe we can organize around her somehow. But they went and met with her, and there were two problems. One was something she had, the other was something she didn't have. What she had was a baby bump. What she did not have was a wedding ring. And they realized in 1950s America, where divorce was still very scandalous in many communities, she's not going to work, all right? Then a few weeks later, it happens to another young African-American woman whose name escapes me right at the moment. Once again, she's hauled off the bus for some infraction. They go and see her, and the problem is her family members have been in and out of jail. It's a family that has very little money, and they realize we can't have it. We need somebody who can appeal to both the poor people, the working class in black Montgomery, but also to the middle class as well too. Well, as they're doing that, the secretary of the NAACP chapter in Montgomery, who works for E.D. Nixon, is Rosa Parks, all right? Rosa Parks is a woman who had been involved for years with the NAACP, taking risks as well in investigating racial incidents in Alabama. She was a seamstress. She was well regarded and whatnot. And on her own, she decided she's going to be the next woman to create an issue, all right? So it wasn't because she was tired. She knew full well what everybody was attempting to do. So she gets arrested that day. And when it happens, when E.D. Nixon learns of that, he calls up Joanne Robbins and says, and he's ecstatic. He says, they've arrested the wrong woman. And what he means is that they've arrested the right woman because she was a churchgoer, she was self-employed, she didn't have a drinking problem, there were no issues about being pregnant, unmarried, and all of that. And what happens after that, of course, is that now what do we do? So a decision is made that we're going to try to have a boycott of the bus system. Now it's interesting, in the original plan of the boycott, with Nixon and Robinson, running the show, there was no, they're not calling for desegregation of the buses. They're simply calling for white bus drivers to treat Negro clients with respect. That's all they're calling for. So what happens is Joanne Robinson gets together other women on the women's committee. That next night, they break into essentially the administration offices at the college where there is a mimeograph machine. All of us are old enough to remember mimeograph machines, smelling the weird smell, all that stuff. And they run off something like 10,000 copies of a flyer saying, we're the next day on Monday morning, whatever it is, we're going to have a boycott of the bus system. There'll also be a rally held that night, okay? So a few different things happen on the way. Well, they get all these flyers, they go out, they paste them everywhere in the black community. But now you're going to have this rally, and there's a problem here. Okay, so who are the most powerful political figures in black communities in the rural South at this time? It's, of course, preachers, all right? And there's plenty of churches in black Montgomery. There's a lot of different jealousies and rivalries. So the most important Methodist preachers and the most important Baptist preachers, number one, they don't want to be the person that's running this boycott because they're convinced that the boycott's nothing's going to happen to it and we're going to end up getting arrested or getting our home bombed by the Klan or whatever the hell it is. But on the other hand, we don't want these other Baptist preachers that we are Church of God in Christ and whatnot. So they're all stuck, and then they all realize, oh, we'll give it to the new guy. And the brand new guy is this 26-year-old untested minister with his first congregation ever, a very small church located a block from the Alabama state capitol. And of course, this is Martin Luther King Jr. All right. So King decides he's going to do this. Now, King had grown up in a prominent African-American family in Atlanta. His father, Martin Luther King Sr., was the most important black preacher in Atlanta. King had grown up a bookworm in a middle-class home, a nice car, all of that stuff, and had gone, of course, to Morehouse College, which is the premier black men's college in America at that point. And the plan was that he would succeed his father at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, all right? So, and in those days, you didn't really have to go to seminary, and there was no thought that that would happen, but he decided, no, I want to go to seminary. And but rather than go to a nice conservative seminary, instead he went to the Crozier Theological Seminary in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Crozier is integrated, all right? So there are black students there, but there are a lot of white students, Northern, Southern, and all of that. He gets to Crozier, and Crozier is absolutely alive with something called the social gospel movement. And the social gospel movement comes out of the ashes of World War II, when preachers are saying, where the hell were we when the Holocaust was going on? What were we doing? Why weren't we doing anything? also great concerns about nuclear destruction and all that, and a sense that we preachers have got to get out of our ivory towers. We've got to go and commit ourselves politically and be a part of this. So as a part of that world, he starts to learn something about nonviolence. Then he goes on to Boston University, gets another degree, and now he's got his first deal. So he decides, okay, I'd be happy to do it. I'm going to do it. So many people crowd around to Dexter Avenue Church that they've got to run speaker wires outside to the crowd in the street. And nobody has heard anybody speak like this young 26-year-old. He absolutely mesmerizes the crowd. Everyone is ready. And so when the boycott begins, by golly, there aren't any black people who are riding the buses in Montgomery, Alabama. Not just that first day, but the second day, the third day, fourth day. Anyway, there's a very long story with that. The boycott goes on for a year. The authorities try everything. They first there is an effort to see if in the boycott side whether you can organize the black taxi cab drivers to take people, but that violates some anti-labor law. They're kept from that. So the organizers, they basically, you've got a car. Well, guess what, Joe? Your car, we're going to be using that every morning and every evening, starting at 4 a.m. You're going to run 5, maids to this part of town, come back, get another set, all of that. Meanwhile, they're holding rallies every night to raise money so we can get gasoline, so we can get new tires, car repairs. It becomes known as the walking city. You have maids that are walking 3, 4, 5 miles every morning to work and coming back as well, too. So there are lots of threats that happen. King's home is dynamited, blown up. Luckily, both he and Coretta and the kids survive. They run out in the street. All of the neighbors come out as well, too, with pistols and shotguns. And they say, let's go get these white MFs right now. And King says, no, no, no. We're nonviolent. We're not going to do this. So they keep putting other pressure on. And at one point, the local police, come and pick up King and arrest him. And all of a sudden, he's now being taken outside of town. He figures he's going to be lynched at this point. He didn't realize there was now a new jail that wasn't downtown, and goes out there. But when word hits the black community that King has been arrested, then something happens that has never happened before, which is in those days, the worst thing you could do as an African American is to get arrested and spend time in jail. That would bring shame upon your family. And so what happens is black leaders in Montgomery, preachers and all, they all go down to the police department and say, I think you want to arrest me too. And this is something that shocks the white community. You also have the white community, you have upper-class white women who aren't used to cleaning their toilets or taking care of their kids or things like that. They start sneaking away to pick up their maids early to bring them to their home. And eventually the bus company is losing money. And what happens is eventually the boycott wins, the city caves, and the civil rights movement to a degree has now begun. It's going to take a while, though, for things to happen. Now, I want to move to one other person, talk about that, and then we can open things up. So, after the Montgomery bus boycott, you would think that the movement really takes off. It doesn't, all right? What happens in Montgomery, a couple of southern cities also desegregate their buses, but most places do not, all right? There's very little activity that happens. King organizes the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. His idea, if we can take black ministers in the South, they will lead this new movement, all right? There's a flurry of activity in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957 over the desegregation of schools there. There's an important lesson that's learned by King and the other SCLC members, which is that if you can get the federal government on your side, that's a way you can counterbalance the power of state and local officials. They learned that lesson, but they're also just trying to figure out what to do. And then out of the blue, there are 4 nobody students at North Carolina A&T College in Greensboro, North Carolina, historic all-black school. Just 4 guys who were not student leaders. They were not athletes. They didn't belong to organizations. They didn't belong to the NAACP. They start talking during the winter of 1959, 1960, and on February 1st, 1961, on their own, they decide to sit in at the local Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, and they launch what's going to become the sit-in movement. All right. Now, because history doesn't always happen the way it should have, the sit-in movement should not have begun in Greensboro, North Carolina. It should have begun in Nashville, Tennessee. And the reason for that has to do with a man by the name of Jim Lawson. Now, James Lawson was a Northerner, African-American, grew up in Ohio, off to college. When the Korean War happens, he's a conscientious objector, refuses to be drafted, and spends time in federal penitentiary for refusing to do so. Afterwards, he learns about Gandhi's nonviolent movement in India. He travels to India. He's living in an ashram in India when the Montgomery bus boycott happens. He reads about it in the Times of India. He eventually comes back to this country, and he wants to be a preacher, and his idol is Martin Luther King, who he meets in 1959 or something like that. And he says, I want to join you and join SCLC. And King says, no, you need to go get your degree. You know, so Lawson becomes the first black graduate student at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, and he gets there, but he now knows about nonviolence. So he starts holding these workshops in nonviolent techniques for African American students at the various colleges, black colleges in Nashville. And amongst them is a young man by the name of Bernard Lafayette. Lafayette was both from Philadelphia and from Florida, so splitting his life in those 2 places. So he's part Southern and part Northern, comes to Nashville for American Baptist College, where he's a student there, hears about these nonviolence workshops, and he starts attending them with a handful of other black students. And the idea is that they're going to go ahead and sit in at segregated restaurants and refuse to leave until they're served, okay? So that's their whole plan. They're all set up, and then these 4 nobodies from Greensboro beats them to the punch. But what happens is that the Nashville students become really well organized, and they have massive sit-in protests that are happening. There's violence against them. Basically, Klansmen and other white racists show up. The police ignore it while they are beaten at the lunch counters, people putting cigarettes out in the back of their neck, stuff like that. Then the police come in and arrest the black students and things like that. And it carries on. What happens is that these young African-American college students, they win the respect of the white, older black citizens who now start putting their houses up, mortgaging their houses and other things to raise money for these students as well too. Tensions go on. The black community then decides that we're not just going to sit in. We're going to boycott all of the white businesses downtown right before Easter in 1960. And the boycott is very effective. White shoppers now, because they're worried about race riots, won't shop downtown. Black shoppers won't shop there either. These are the merchants that have the power in the city. They're taking it from both sides. They don't know what to do. And then the home of the one sole black city councilman in Nashville, Alexander Luby, is dynamited. It smashes out windows in Meharry Medical College, black medical school across from that. Luby goes ahead and survives this. And as a result of that, the movement leaders then have the first mass march of the civil rights movement in Nashville, where they confront the white mayor, Ben West of Nashville, and these young students, among them Bernard Lafayette. Do you think it's right for businessmen to discriminate against customers? And he admits that it is not publicly. Took a big chance doing that, but that's the breakthrough, okay? So Lafayette has been a part of this group, okay? And he's learned these techniques, he's withstood the violence, he's gone to jail and all of that. And then a year later, the Freedom Rides happened. And the Freedom Rides was cooked up by a group called CORE. CORE is a Northern civil rights organization, the Congress of Racial Equality. They were founded in the 1920s as an interracial group, a nonviolent pacifist group. And they had attempted a sort of an integrated bus boycott called the Journey of Reconciliation in the late 1940s. The Supreme Court had ruled that you cannot have segregated interstate bus travel, okay, in the United States. In the South, everyone ignored that. Black people sit in the back, white in the front. They decided after a Supreme Court ruling that they would test this. So they took a group of riders from Washington, D.C., sort of made a foray into West Virginia, a little northern, little bit of, Virginia. They get to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, as this integrated group sitting in, quote, the wrong areas. The local white bus drivers or taxi drivers in Chapel Hill have organized. They're planning on lynching these people. The police stop them, take the riders to Durham, where they put them on a train to get back to Washington, D.C., never come back again. All right. So meanwhile, CORE has sort of been in the background. You have SCLC, who is now associated with the Montgomery bus boycott. There's this new organization called SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, that comes out of the sit-in movement. And CORE is like, well, wait a second, hello, we've been around for a long time. So they decide to do something, and their plan is to redo this journey of reconciliation. They're going to take a group of black and white riders from Washington, D.C. They're going to have the black riders sit up front on interstate buses, white riders sit in the back. They're going to go all the way, through, the Carolinas, Atlanta, Alabama, Mississippi, and end up in New Orleans, and to show. And their plan is, they don't really have a plan. Their plan is, we figured that the racists would do something and we would wing it. Well, they make it all the way to Atlanta. They meet with Martin Luther King. They invite him to join the Freedom Rides. He refuses to do so because his dad has contacts in the FBI and has told him that the Klan is going to attack the Freedom Riders as soon as they enter Alabama. And that's exactly what happened. So in Anniston and in Birmingham, Freedom Riders are attacked, beaten within inches of their lives, and CORE calls it quits. They say, we're done. It's all over. Meanwhile, back in Nashville, those SNCC students, those sit-in students, which include Bernard Lafayette, decided they had hated the idea of the Freedom Ride. They didn't think it was very practical, but they said, if the Freedom Ride ends now, it'll send the message that all the racists have to do in the South is to go ahead and attack us with violence, and that we'll quit. So they decide they're going to pick up the baton in the Freedom Ride. So they all end up in Birmingham to get on the buses, all of that. So Bernard Lafayette, experiences all of this. The Freedom Rides are ultimately successful in that it forces the Kennedy administration to go ahead and to enforce desegregation on interstate bus travel. Okay. So here's Bernard Lafayette, this young guy who's had these incredible experiences, and he's trying to figure out what to do next. So one day in about 1963 probably, he goes to the SNCC office in Atlanta, Georgia, and says, what's the worst place there is to go in the South? They say, well, that's easy. That's Selma, Alabama. We'll send a SNCC worker there to organize the black community. They'll last about 3 days and they're gone. So Lafayette says, well, send me there then. So Selma is a just small southern city. It's run with an iron hand by Sheriff Jim Clark. And, if you get arrested by the police in Selma, if you're black, you're going to have your teeth knocked out. You're going to have bones broken, regardless of whether you did anything or not. The black community, which makes up half of the city, there's less than 1% who vote. They have very few rights. It's very much a beaten down community. And Lafayette decides, I'm going to go and try to organize it. But he does a couple things first. First thing he does, he goes to Tuskegee Institute, Tuskegee University, HBCU, and he studies everything he can about Selma, learns about its history in the Civil War, studies its economics and all of that. He then meets with a well-known African-American college football coach named Rufus Lewis, who had grown up in Selma, and talks to him about the approach. And Lewis says, look, you know, these people are so beaten down, you're going to have to go really slow. All right, so Bernard Lafayette moves to Selma. He first tries to go to some of the local high schools to see if he can get high school students. You know, young people are immortal. They consider themselves immortal. They don't have to worry about mortgages and jobs and stuff like that. And he's chased away by the principals, the black principals of those schools, saying, get the hell out of here. We don't want anything to do with you. So he finds a couple who's been a quiet activist by the name of Boykin, or Boyd rather, and stays with them, and they give other advice to him. They say, look, everybody knows you're a freedom rider, and everybody in town wants nothing to do with you because they're worried if you're associated, so you're going to have to start in a different way. So what Lafayette does, he starts holding very small meetings in private homes with just 2 or 3 neighbors, and the discussion isn't the civil rights movement. The discussion is simply citizenship. Let's talk about citizenship and what that means for black people in, 1960s America. And what happens in these meetings as parents start talking about their concerns about their future for their children, all of their anger and anguish start to come out in these meetings. And Lafayette has now made a connection with these people. So he'll keep going and pushing slowly, getting people used to him and what's going on. Then he'll start to have larger meetings, not super large, maybe 25 or 30 people in a local church to talk about this. But he does something very interesting, which is that rather than, he's had trouble getting any of the middle class blacks to have any association with him at all because they're worried about what's going to happen to them. So sometimes some will come to these meetings, teachers and businessmen, people like that. Rather than have any of them talk, and they wouldn't do it anyway, he went out and got unlettered, unschooled farmers, independent farmers, to speak at these meetings with poor grammar, but with heart and good ideas, to shame the middle class blacks because they just couldn't stand listening to this, I axe this and all this stuff. They then start to join this group as well too, all right? He also reaches out to military retirees and others where the white community cannot pressure the people economically to do this. And this is how he builds things. Slowly that way, very carefully, and there ends up that Mr. Boyd, who he lived with, had died, and so he decides to turn Boyd's funeral into the first political mass meeting of the black community in Selma for civil rights. Now, white people aren't dumb, and Jim Clark gets a hold of this. So Jim Clark comes with his deputies. They write down all the license plate numbers of all the people who've shown up because they can identify them. Then they take their billy clubs and they knock out a tail light on all of them so they can give them all tickets for having bad tail lights and sending a message to it. But Lafayette has started something now, and then he, in a way, gets lucky in that the Klan decides they got to get rid of this guy or do something to him. And one day on a street in the community where there's some people working on a car, 2 Klansmen beat the hell out of him, with iron rods and whatnot, split his head open, blood all over his shirt. But what Lafayette does is he wears that shirt, that same bloody shirt, in the community for the next 3 days to shame the local folks into realizing if this guy who ain't even here is standing up for us, we're going to stand up as well. And what happens later after that incident and a couple others where African Americans tried to go ahead and register to vote at the county courthouse, Jim Clark's deputies attack them. That's when Martin Luther King comes, and that's when you're going to have the height of the movement. All right. So the point of this whole story is that larger stories, story about Rosa Parks just being too tired and all that, they're okay to a certain degree. But when you really start to dig down into these things, you realize there's a wonderful quote in Middlemarch about how, I don't have the quote in front of me right now, but before any large happening, there are always these unknown people who paved the way, and that's the story of the Civil Rights Movement as well. All right, so that's what I got for you all today, and which was supposed to be 2 weeks from now, I thought. So at any rate, but I'm good. When do we all break? Do we have a few minutes for questions? What's the story?
Well, we got started late, so we're not
Oh,
going
okay.
to rush
All right.
out at
Good.
noon. I don't
All
think
right.
anybody wants to do that. So if you want to ask a question, please have this mic in your hand and at your mouth so that people can hear.
It's not a question, it's just an experience that I had.
Sure.
I was I coached at William and Mary in 1973, and I was recruiting up in Northern Virginia, and I called and they said, "Oh, you're one of those foreigners they hired," and as late as 1997, there were members of the staff on the when I coached there that if they played Dixie, I'm sure he'd bounce right up out of his chair.
Sure.
And he was so it was even in the high schools in 60s and as late as that time when I was there in 73 that it was still touch and go with segregation. Yet then there were problems that they had with the schools, but it was an experience for me because I've been around African Americans all my life, and I coached, and half the team is black, and so
Sure.
this was quite a shock to me that they would even do this.
Sure, and we should. It's important to note that there was plenty of segregation in the North as well too. Black students in the 1940s couldn't live in the dormitories at the University of Michigan. Certain places you could go, certain places you can't go. Movie theaters were typically, segregated in Michigan as well too. The balcony is where African Americans could sit and things like that. So, segregation was a national problem, but the response against it in the South was much more intense simply because of the numbers of African Americans there. You allow them to have political power, what's that going to do to our way of life? I think you had a hand up.
Yeah. This kind of is more of a practical question
Sure.
in terms of just how Lafayette financed his ability to do this. Was it sort of support from SNCC? Now, obviously, he was, as I understood it, living with Boyd, so that
Right.
helped at least with some of
Yeah.
this. But in terms of being able to mobilize over this extended period of time, and then how did SNCC get money? A Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, how did they get donations, or whatever did they do?
Right, and that would have come through any of those organizations. So after the Montgomery, this draws us into Michigan a little bit. After the Montgomery bus boycott, Martin Luther King was on the cover of Time magazine. He becomes the most famous African American leader of the time, all right? And along with organizing the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, he also goes on a speaking tour all over the country, speaking on the West Coast, speaking in the North and whatnot, and trying to raise money. And what happens is that he also realizes that there are white Northerners who are supportive of civil rights. And, is going to find, white philanthropists who will write checks to SCLC and later to SNCC and organizations as well, too. And, but the learning goes beyond that. So on the North Carolina-Tennessee border, there was something called the Highlander Folk School, which goes back to the 1930s or so. And it was a left-wing school that comes out of the labor movement in part, organizing the coal industry in Appalachia. But we have to remember that, in Western North Carolina, East Tennessee, the South isn't monolithic by any means. You could take the state of Florida, the further south you go, the further north it gets and stuff like that. In the mountains of the southern Appalachians when during the Civil War, when Confederate recruiters came to those counties, they were shot at by the locals who wanted nothing to do with the Confederacy, stuff like that. So this Highlander folk school, and it would get raided by the North Carolina or Tennessee state troops every once in a while. It kept moving this way and across the border. But they held meetings after the Montgomery bus boycott prior to the sit-in movements, where King and others in the movements would come together and they'd meet white Northern philanthropists and leftists, but they also met veterans of the auto union fights in Detroit. You know, UAW people who would battle against, you know, company goons that are armed with baseball bats and stuff like that, and knew something about organizing as well too. So they're starting to share experiences, but that also helps to give them money. And this is sort of the era of folk music being particularly popular. And there was a folk singer by the name of Guy Carawan who comes to one of these meetings where the SNCC people are there and the white union people from Michigan and Northern philanthropists and things like that. And he teaches everybody a song. And the song is "We Shall Overcome." And it had begun as a song sung by African American cannery workers in South Carolina in the 1940s. This was it, and was called "We Will Overcome" at that point, to give themselves courage during the strike. And then Pete Seeger had heard about it, and then he changed it to "We Shall Overcome." And Carawan, you know, introduces that to the King and others, and that's going to become one of the anthems of the movement. So, you know, the movement itself isn't just one thing. It's different groups coming from different times, and it evolves along the way.
Anybody else? If not, I'll have my own question. So many of us, I think, are very concerned about the distortions in history telling that are happening in this country.
Really? A surprise.
As a former employee of the Smithsonian,
Right.
And the ways that we're seeing the story, the narratives are being adjusted, shall we say, for ideological gain and so on. So as an historian yourself, what worries do you have about this? What do you think is going to happen? How can we push back as people that are very concerned and so on?
Well, let's talk nitty gritty. And I was very pleased to hear you, Dave, talk about some nonviolence training that was about to happen. We're at an inflection point in the history of our country. And this is serious business right now. Everything right now is leading up until 9 months from now in the 2026 congressional elections. Can we get there? And if so, can we put a brake on this administration? All right. So that's a part of the key of it. I mean, it's horrible what's going on. They just took down at some federal site in Philadelphia, mentioned slavery, got rid of that, got rid of all that stuff. I have a couple of artifacts that are actually in the African American History Museum of the Smithsonian, some pennies that were burned during the Tulsa Race Massacre that I donated there. I think these things are of concern, but we have greater problems right now. And what we need to do is we need to organize our friends, our neighbors, the weird cousin who never votes, the whatever it is, to take very seriously this election that's going to happen. And we're also going to be faced with lots more challenges. You know, what's going on in Minneapolis. The Trump administration has taken a little step back, but not much of a step back. They're getting ready I heard from a good friend in Portland, Oregon, where I've lived, and he said, you know, they're getting ready for a new surge in ICE, and it's not going to be as peaceful as going to happen in Minneapolis, with the idea that this will give Trump the ability to invoke the Insurrection Act. So what we're going to have to do as Americans who care about our country, who care about our institutions, who all of us stand on the shoulders of our great-great-great-grandparents who fought and died for freedom in the Civil War and World War II and whatnot, we're going to need to start taking some guts and sticking our necks out and to stop this and to let people know that this madness has to stop. And we have to do it in a way that just doesn't alienate people, but that opens the door for this happening. You know, as horrible as the murder of Renee Good was, the murder of there's a wonderful piece in the New York Times this morning about Preddy and his killing and how that really changed the nature of things. This happened in the civil rights movement as well, too. There were plenty of black people that got killed in the civil rights movement, but it was until, Cheney and Schwerner of Goodwin, Cheney and Schwerner that were murdered during the summer of 1964. It was until the Unitarian minister from Boston, whose name I can't remember, was murdered in Selma in 1965. These are important inflection points. If you're going to try to change the minds of white people are going to die to make that happen. That's the reality of it. But I think that we need to stop and look. I grew up in the reddest state in the United States. In Oklahoma, not a single county voted for Obama in either of his elections. In all three of Trump's elections, he won every single county in my home state. In the last election, Trump won Oklahoma by 35 points. I have tons of Republican friends. My dad was a lifelong Republican, all of that. But what we have to do is to open the door to people realizing you don't have to stick with the party line, and that we're crossing barriers that's going to be very difficult to move back from. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's my thinking.
Very helpful. Very helpful. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Because if not, I have another question.
I'm never for want.
Well, this is just a short question or a comment.
Okay.
I'm concerned about voting in November
Why?
because I think they're going to bring in their people to collect ballots, to do everything they can to discredit the votes that they don't want to acknowledge.
I think that's a concern. I think it's more concern that they're going to, put ICE agents or something at the polling places. But we got to show up too, and we've got to be there. We need to be there encouraging people. We need to get our neighbors, the weird nephew, all of those people that don't vote to vote. And because if we don't put the brakes on now, I'm not sure how we're going to do it otherwise, frankly. And we're already, the idea that a president, I'm just astonished at what's happening, that a president could decide, I'm going to destroy a third of the White House, just like that. When did our presidents ever, and let's be honest about it, it's not just Trump, it's the Republican Party, it's those people, the Republican congressmen and senators who have shown no courage whatsoever, and nobody will stick their neck out on all this, and they need to be encouraged to do that.
Okay, oh, here's another question.
Maybe this isn't so important, but when they take down these things from the Smithsonian and other places about slavery and so on, does someone keep those so that we can restore them, or are they going to have to be recreated?
I would imagine that, I would think in this age of digital cameras and things being online, I think those things, I can't, they haven't, look, the African American History Museum has not been attacked yet. That would be, so I teach all sorts of students at the University of Michigan, and I have a number of conservative students who are MAGA or grew up in MAGA worlds and stuff like that. And they will talk to me because I'm not trying to push a particular party line on them. I'm trying to get them to just, think about a lot of things. So anyway, I have a former student who's works in the White House, and I visited her there. She worked in the first Trump administration under, what's Ivanka's last name? Trump. No, the other one. Kushner. She worked for Kushner in the first. Now she works for RFK Jr. in the second one. She invited me to come. Would you like to speak at the Kennedy Center? I was like, no, I don't think so. But everything is so crazy. They don't follow through on anything. It's like, well, let's invade Iran. Let's do Greenland. Let's do something else. So I'm not. it's like the notion that Obama was going to come for your guns. Like, what a laugh. I mean, there are more guns than people in the United States. How many million people are you going to have do that? So I'm not particularly worried about those artifacts unless they start, hauling away in trucks. They'll be there. That kind of stuff takes forever. Don't mean to be so preachy, but you're opening the door, so I'm letting it ride.
You're at church.
Right, there we go.
What do you think will happen when they went into Atlanta and took all the voting, all the ballots and things like that?
Personally, I'm not worried about it. It's to show, you go down and, they're not going to find it. Nobody's going to believe any evidence that they found. Certainly not the majority of Americans. I think that's just another, if you want to keep Epstein off the news, Trump is doing a great job of it. Let's create a new crisis. Let's do this. Let's do that. With Kristi Noem showing up for that, like, why is she there? And, look, we need to, look, my wife she has her own business now and she works at home. She'll have CNN on all day. I come home, I said, no, we're putting on the Hallmark Channel and doing something else so you can regain some emotional equilibrium. And I think we have to stop reacting. Trump is really good at getting people to react. There's a lot of stuff we just have to ignore. We need to organize. We need to organize here. This church should be organizing. Why don't we have a big no ice sign in the front yard? There are things that we can do, and let's do it. This is an incredible institution. The Michigan Anti-Slavery Society was founded by this church. We've had a good history, a good heritage. We're not a bunch of crazies. We're viewed as our local, frozen chosen, Presbyterians, but the more that we can become visible on this, I think during this crisis is important.
We have a committee.
Well, good. All right. Okay, we've got her. Let's got her too.
Should we give it 5 more minutes and then are y'all good? Because usually we end at noon, but we got started late. Okay.
Because of Scott.
I have a big concern reading about so many young people, this Turning Point USA, and they said even after Charlie Kirk's murder, how many more have signed up, and now there are more this Nick Fuentes supporters. Is there any judgment? How big is this? Is this really a youth? Where does this come from? Well, yeah, that's all other, but
so I think Kirk was a very charismatic figure. I don't think that they have anyone that's quite of his impact. I think it's to be concerned about. I think if you want to analyze the Democratic Party, they with their large focus on women, and a sense that that's going to be the core base of the party that's going to win the election, there was not attention given to young men. There was not attention given to white working class families in particular. And, remember, a basket of deplorables. Things like that that's just how you just wipe it out. So I think that's to be concerned about, but I think our response needs to be, we need to do a better job of organizing sane Americans to stop this attack on our institutions and on the principles we hold dear. I think you had your question. You had a hand up? No, you didn't?
I did.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
It was just a comment.
Okay.
First, I just want to thank you so much it was so informative and interesting, and it was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
And I might add that very impressive that you had no notes or computer. It was very good.
Oh, great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So I was trying to think of something in the spirit of hopefulness as we sort of end the session
Sure.
today. And so I was struck, many of you probably had a chance to hear the American Revolution that Ken Burns put on PBS. And he was asked, obviously in the context of what's happening now, where does this fit in sort of the spectrum of history? It's not only an issue of what we should do, but can we get past this? And he made comparisons, obviously, to the Civil War and to the American Revolution, and not to minimize the current circumstance, but he said those circumstances were far worse. And so I'd be interested in your perspective, with the scope of historical knowledge that you have, where you'd place this on an analog scale, and do you see as, yeah, we can get past this because we've gotten past more.
Well, I do think that we can, but we can't be complacent about it. I mean, history happens. You know, for as long as anybody could remember, every society in the world, every group of people in the world had some sort of a monarch, a king or a queen, somebody who was above everyone. Then in 1776 and 1789, two groups of people decided we're not going to have those anymore. And there are, what, 3 countries or something in the world today where you actually have monarchs that have power. We had slavery in the United States from the 1500s until 1865, and it went away. We had 100 years of Jim Crow, and it went away. So big changes can happen. I mean, what we're really asking for is a return to our normal standards way of life. Nobody wants to get rid of the Republican Party. We just want a older version of it and not this personality cult that's going on. And so no, I think that we can do it, but I don't think that if we don't do something, it's going to happen.
Okay, well, Scott, I can't tell you how much we appreciate you coming.
Oh, thanks.
And talking and speaking to us. If you haven't read The Secret Game, which is the one that I'm most familiar with of your books, I highly recommend it. But everything Scott has written is worth your time and attention. We're lucky that he's in our midst.
And he always comes late, and I'm the first to leave. But you can catch me if you're on your toes. I sit way in the back.
Well, I think the blame was mine that for about today not reminding you. But anyway, so we have a little gift for you.
Oh, wow.
And it's not much. And I don't know when the last time it had any water.
Okay.
But if you're a cactus lover, you'll know how to take care
Well,
of it.
my wife will love it, so this will be good. So thank you very much.
All right.
Okay,
Thank you,
thanks a lot.
Scott.
Thanks a lot.